wow, that's really clear. Holy shit.
Yeah, not bad for green, huh?
Yeah.
Also got
Fuck yeah.
truck light on behind me.
Did anybody not shoot their tightest group with that one? Good. Okay. And so those are our levels of sight confirmation. So as we into some of your visibility as you move through, and then there is going to be some lights placed throughout, create some of those photonic barriers you guys will have to deal with. Okay. When you cross the driveway in, there is some water on the side of the road. I dropped a chem line in it. You should be able to step right over it. So just be aware of that. And then once you get over the other side of the driveway, you're going to start getting more into the tree cover. That's going to change the illumination requirement. Continue to follow the green chem. Bye. Okay. Overall, looking pretty good, guys. Afternoon.
Okay. So please state your name.
I am Blake Flannery.
Okay. Who's Blake Flannery?
So I am a retired Marine. I did 20 years in active duty, and now I, through a couple different ventures, continue to train military, civilian, and law enforcement. So I did 20 years in active duty. I joined up when I was 17 at the beginning of my senior year, and I shipped off to boot camp pretty much immediately following high school graduation. 9/11 happened while I was in boot camp, so it was an interesting experience. And then did about 3 years in the infantry, went over to Force Recon in 2004, and served within the reconnaissance community until I retired in 2021. Did a couple different billets. I was a Marine combat instructor at a reconnaissance training company in Camp Pendleton, and then my last 4 years was out here working Special Tactics Branch.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what is it to be a recondo?
So to be a Recon Marine is a very interesting beast. You know, once I actually was a full-fledged 0321 reconnaissance man and was in my first team, I was alerted to the kind of very basic reality that within the Marine Corps there are two types of people, and there are groupies and there are haters. And it's, you know, very generalized, but it does really tend to play out in that fashion. You have people that think you're great and, you know, they think you're cool, and then there are people who just dislike you because you are a reconnaissance Marine and they think that you are somehow antithetical to who they are. Sure. as a Marine. And so it's a very interesting ballet that plays out. And then, you know, on top of that, as a reconnaissance Marine, you are held to the same standards that Special Operations Forces are held to. You are not, however, under Special Operations Command, and therefore you are not Special Operations. So you are in this weird area where you are trying to perform certain missions and uphold a certain standard, and meanwhile you are working for a level that does not understand that standard, and they tend to clash with ideas and other things. So it's interesting. It can be very difficult and frustrating at times, but I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. I had overall, despite everything that happened throughout my career, I had a really great time being a Recon Marine.
So why the Marine Corps?
I mean, it's hard to really pin it down. Being in the military was something I always wanted to do growing up. And when I was a kid, I thought that, you know, the Marines were like Rambo. Like Rambo could do everything. You know, he could drive tanks, he could fly helicopters. I thought that's what Marines were trained to do, is they were trained to do everything. And so that always interested me more than the other services. For a while, I kind of turned my sights onto something different, but I was sitting in biology class my sophomore year, and the F-117 had been shot down over, I think it was Kosovo.
Wow.
And I was sitting in class and we were talking about it because, this was something that concerned us. I was like, oh my God, one of our stealth fighters was shot down, and, what's going to happen if another country gets a hold of our stealth technology. And one of the kids in class turned around, he's like, oh, they'll probably send Force Recon to recover it. And I was like, what the hell's Force Recon? I'd heard of SEALs and Green Berets, but I'd never heard of Recon or Force Recon. And he explained it to me very simply. They're the Navy SEALs for the Marine Corps. I was like, well, that's awesome. I was like, I'm gonna be a Marine. just right there, I was like, I'm joining the Marines. I was 15, sophomore year of high school. Everyone's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna join the Marines. For a little while, I thought about becoming a SEAL, and I had been convinced by other people who I thought knew more about the military than I that you could go to BUD/S and become a SEAL from the Marine Corps. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to join the Marine Corps and go Force Recon. And at some point, I'll, go to BUD/S and I'll become a Navy SEAL, and that'll be super awesome and great. I did find out that is not true. It's not a thing you can do. It may have been at one point or another with some very specific billets. But yeah, I just made the decision and joined up. Almost didn't. When I went up to MEPS and I took the ASVAB, I scored really high, and my recruiter wanted to push me into a technical MOS, but I did not want a technical MOS. I wanted recon, and if I couldn't get recon, I wanted infantry. So he sat me down with this book of all the MOSs, and all of a sudden he grabbed like 3 pages and just keeps flipping. I didn't think anything of it. He got to the end of the book. He's like, did any of that interest you? I'm like, well, where were all the infantry MOSs? Like, there was no infantry. I'm like, we're in those pages that you skipped? And he's like, oh, you noticed that? I'm like, of course I noticed that. You grabbed a bunch of pages and flipped them at once. Like,
And this is nice.
And, so he kind of pulled a fast one on me, and because I was so adamant about infantry or recon, he's like, well, you got to finish your senior year, and we're not going to ship you out to the end of the summer, so you've got plenty of time to figure it out. Like, we're not going to worry about your contract yet. And I was naive and said, okay. And then he changed hands with another recruiter, and apparently I've been left off of the list of poolees who did not have a contract yet. So just a couple of months out from graduating and shipping, I'm talking to my new recruiter. I'm like, hey man, I still don't have a contract. And he says, well, that's interesting. And they tried to give me something else. They tried to push me to tanker, for one. And I was like, no, I don't want to be a tanker. They offered me security forces, and I was like, I don't want security forces. Like, I want infantry or recon. Like, well, security forces is infantry. I'm like, I get it. I don't want that. And there had been an event, and myself and one of the other Marine poolees went up against a couple of BUD/S candidates, a couple guys who were training, go to BUD/S, hadn't even been to Navy boot camp yet, and we smoked them. So the SEAL recruiter had come over and tried to poach us from the Marines. So when the Marines were trying to push me into a different MOS and just trying to get me to go regardless, I hollered across the hallway and I asked if the SEAL contract was still available. And I don't know if he was just helping me out and he overheard the conversation, or if he got excited and thought I was serious about it. But he leaned back out of the door and was like, "Yep, still available." And all the Marine Corps was like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa! Like, hold on. Let's see what we can do." And so, long story short, although I definitely not good at that, I ended up leaving for boot camp about a month earlier than expected. So it was literally like 2 weeks after I graduated high school. Left for boot camp early. They called me up on a Thursday and said, you have to leave on next Wednesday.
Sure.
And I was like, okay, that's what it's going to be.
How did your parents take that?
They were a little upset because about 4 days later, we were taking a big family vacation out to Wyoming. I grew up mainly in Connecticut.
Very cool.
And we were taking a family vacation out to Wyoming to see other family out there. So it was gonna be like this last vacation before, I get shipped off to boot camp. So they were upset about that. I was a little upset because I do like that area of Wyoming. And then more writing on the wall for how the Marine Corps was gonna be.
Oh, good old Green Union.
I was told that they would show up at 0 dark 30 was the exact wording that was used. I'm like, I know what that means. So, my parents were both divorced and remarried, so I've got all my family coming to the house, and we're all waiting up, and no one shows up to pick me up. So I start calling everyone I can. I'm calling all the recruiters' phones, calling the recruiting offices, calling the main MEP station in Springfield, Massachusetts, trying to get anybody I can on the phone, and no one knows what's going on that I can get on the phone. Finally, the next day at like 11 a.m., somebody returns the phone call. It's like, oh, there was a mistake. You're getting picked up tonight. And even then, I was told, again, by 2 a.m., and the recruiter didn't show up until 4 a.m. to pick me up, which is just more writing on the wall how things would go.
Hurry up and wait.
Yeah.
Hurry up and wait.
But, I was just so excited to go. My whole senior year just dragged on forever because I just wanted to go and get it done. I wanted to start my new life as a Marine. So
100%.
I kind of overlooked all that as just a funny story I would tell in the future, which it is, but it definitely foreshadowed how things would be.
100%. What company were you?
So in boot camp, I was Echo Company, which I think is 2nd Recruit Training Battalion, and I was platoon 2092.
East Coast, right?
Yep.
Very cool. Paris Island.
Yep.
A different time.
Parris Island was very, very interesting. It seemed to exist in its like own dimension, and I never looked into research like what the weather patterns are down there, but I had a top rack, and my head was positioned inboard into the squad base so I could look out through the window every night, and it seemed like every single night there were these massive electrical storms in the distance. Just nothing but clouds and just bolts of lightning just striking the ground like continuously almost throughout the night.
Hatred. This place just exists just of
It was,
malice and hate.
And it didn't even rain on us very often while we were in recruit training, so it was just very surreal, having grown up in New England where like it's always raining and it's always gray, and you get the occasional thunderstorm, to now like every night I'm watching these massive electrical storms on the horizon. So it just kind of added to the mystique of boot camp.
100%. Oh my gosh. So then you graduated recruit training, and then tell me about your first unit. What was your first deployment like?
So my first unit was 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, and
1-5.
initially myself and with 4 or 5 other Marines from my infantry training battalion company were pulled aside because we all had orders to 1-5. And at the time, 1-5 had a mission to go into Tajikistan and secure an airfield to support Operation Enduring Freedom. So they were like, hey, you guys are going to check into your unit in combat. We just want to let you know that, that way you're not shocked by it and you can prepare your families. And I was like, all right,
Cool.
Baptism by fire, like this is actually happening.
Yeah.
Okay. It did not happen. The mission got canceled at the last minute, so I checked into essentially a ghost battalion because they had missed their holiday leave, and were given 30 days to just go home on leave and decompress and catch up with their families. So I checked in with the other few guys, and I was one of 2 11s. The other guys were weapons company. And so it was very interesting. It was basically me and all the Marines on restriction. So it was an interesting first couple of weeks. I was sold a stolen TV that I had to give back once the battalion came back, and I was like, great, I'm already in trouble. I'm like brand new, but they were like, no, you're not in trouble. Like you didn't know any better. One thing of interest was one of these restriction terminal Lance fellas threw me a 6-5, which is now the I think it's the 03 TAC 11. Back then it was the FM 6-5, and he threw it at me, and he's like, "Read this, boot," and I was like, "Oh, okay." And so it was a long weekend. I spent the entire 72 going cover to cover. I must have read that thing like 3 times a day. And so I went through all that knowledge again and again and again. And it was stuff that I had been taught within the School of Infantry, but I was falling asleep a lot and I didn't have like the best instructors back then. So I was like relearning all this knowledge and information and just ingraining it into my psyche. So when the battalion did come back off of leave and we started formulating, platoons and squads and fire teams, I already just knew way more than all my peers. But it was mostly I could recite the book. I didn't yet have full practical knowledge of it.
Sure.
And that was something I learned later on. It's like, it's good to know what's in the book, but you have to put it to practice to actually make it a skill, not just knowledge. But it definitely helped me out. It made me a fire team leader as a PFC. It was interesting times because back then there was still a policy that a lot of judges had that depending on your offense, they would offer you jail time or military. And usually it was jail time or Marine Corps. And so there was usually a few guys in every platoon that were there because they chose the Marine Corps over going to jail. It's just a very different atmosphere overall. And because these fellows were usually much older, they'd be in their, mid-20s, which is not older, but when you're 17, 18 years old, a guy who's 25, 26 is old to you.
So Iraq.
Yep. So, we did our workup within 1-5. I was Alpha Company. And the whole workup, it was ironic, I guess. We were always fighting these imaginary, Iraqi companies and battalions the entire workup. But we were supposed to go on the 31st MU. We're going to UDP to Okinawa and, do the whole 31st MU thing. And, I was not really looking forward to it. Just lots of horror stories from my seniors about, everything on ship is broken and the toilet's overflowing and there's, piss and crap water floating around. And all they could talk about is just all the things they were going to do to us for the shellback ceremony crossing the equator. I'm like, all right, so this is going to suck, but this is what it is. Like, this is, we deploy, and when you're deployed, who knows what's going to happen. What ended up happening is we went on pre-deployment leave, which actually lined up with the holidays. So went home for Christmas of 2002. Going for Christmas, and I flew back on New Year's Day so that I would have a couple of days before the rest of the battalion came back to kind of like decompress from my so-called vacation back home with my family. And one of my guys been placed on restriction for a myriad of reasons, and went and checked on him, and he was like, hey, we're going back to SIF, which was also a brand new thing, and we're going to get our gear back. I'm like, well, why would we do that? Like, we just spent all that time turning it into that, SIF thing. They're like, well, we're going to Kuwait. And I'm like, you don't know anything, dude. Like, you heard a rumor. There's no way that's happening. But he was definitely tuned in to the Lance Corporal Underground, and sure as shit, everyone comes back off of leave. We had a gathered in one of the battalion classrooms, and our company commander was like, this is what's happening. We are gonna get our gear back. We're gonna do some last minute training to hit some medals, and we're deploying to Kuwait for the eventual, invasion into Iraq. It was like, okay, like this is actually gonna happen. This is gonna go down. And so we did a few more weeks of training. And then it was early February, I think it was February 5th. We were in Kuwait. We were in country. And then, it was March 19th or 20th. You would think that's an important date I remember, but I can't for the life of me. 19th, 20th, that evening of, early morning of, we crossed the line of departure and into Iraq. So completely unexpected, and fortunately we had a pretty good workup, and our company commander was really big on CBurn. So we were constantly doing hikes in gas masks. We were constantly doing training events in full mop gear, including hikes, constantly doing the decontamination process and, getting out of your mop suit, getting a fresh one on, like as far and as realistic as we can make that training with the resources available. A lot of hiking, so we were in really good shape to move under load. We understood, the tactics of fire movement, fire maneuver really well. We're not the best of marksmen. I think the entire workup, I fired maybe 12 magazines out of my rifle, and then for a short period, I was a saw gunner through an ITX. So I got a few drums through the saw. So not a whole lot of time actual live fire training. So I wasn't very confident in my skill sets there, but everything else I had confidence that we could do our rushes, do our fire maneuver. And we did more training in Kuwait, so it went as well as it probably could have, but there were a lot of deficiencies that we had, and so those are things that are ingrained into me, and one of the reasons that I've gone the ways that I have gone when it comes to training and what I continue to do, now after I've retired from Marine Corps. I'm very adamant about training to certain things.
MTS, what is Maneuver Training Solutions?
So Maneuver Training Solutions is a company that I started. Initially, it was I needed an LLC so that I could work with Orion Training Group, because as I went on terminal leave, I made a little post about it, and Jared Arsenault, who runs Orion, reached out to me. He's like, "Hey, would you like to come on?" And I said, "Absolutely." So we were talking about the particulars, and he's like, "You gotta start an LLC." Okay. And once I started that LLC, I realized that there was a gap, in this area, particular in the market for training. I always wanted to seek additional training on top of what I was able to do in the Marine Corps, but that would mean traveling, many states over to go get it done, or at least here in North Carolina, traveling halfway across the state to certain places. And I wanted to provide something that would be a frequent venue for Marines or anyone else who wanted the training to come out and be able to further their skill sets. And because of that lack of training I had in certain areas going into my first couple deployments, I wanted to make sure I could provide the opportunity for Marines to not just learn more and get better within their own skills, but to be able to take that back to their units and continue to train their own people with it. Continue to train other Marines or whoever else might come and attend the training. They could take what I give them and then teach it to others. So everything I do is designed around that concept of train the trainer. As much as I would love for people to keep coming back, and I definitely have a handful of returning students, I would not want anybody to come back to a class because they didn't feel like they got enough. I want everyone to walk away from a class having the tools that they can continue their own training and essentially never need me again.
I see that. I see. Tell me why the American Rifleman is so important.
So that concept of the American Rifleman brings me back to how our nation started. And though we had a formal army to fight the British and earn our independence, a lot of what we relied upon were the civilian militia. And I think that is something that we have lost over the years. And even that word militia kind of brings up these negative connotations of a bunch of out-of-shape people in the backwoods wearing all kinds of random camouflage and just doing all kinds of weird stuff and have all these like off-the-wall beliefs. And the whole concept has been kind of villainized. And I'm not here to say, hey, we need a militia or anything like that, but it's to build the American Rifleman, to build somebody who is proficient with a rifle, who's proficient with their weapons, who understands fieldcraft, and ultimately is someone who understands community. Someone who can have their own skills and take that into their community and then share those skills and then offer those skills and then bring other people together and rebuild that sense of a nation through just slowly building community again. Because ultimately that's the biggest thing I think that we've lost, and we've allowed ourselves to become so divided. and that concept of that American Rifleman, that person who becomes very dangerous, but they have it under control. They have the ability to be dangerous, doesn't mean they need to be dangerous and violent. And
stay dangerous. Is that yours?
yeah.
Okay.
And my experience is that the people who are truly dangerous, lethal, violent people are usually some of the most polite and kind people that you will run into, because they know that they are dangerous. They have that confidence in their skills and their abilities that they don't need to tell everyone, you know, how amazing they are, what it is. They understand it. They have the capacity, and they understand the ramifications if they choose to enact that violence in a given situation. And because they understand that, they opt not to until it is truly necessary. And so that's what I'm hoping to kind of help reinvigorate.
The question to ask. Tell me what I should expect from your classes.
So my primary audience through my goal is, by proximity mainly, the Marines of Camp Lejeune. And because of being a Marine myself, I have a natural bias to wanting to support them. But ultimately, it is to support any service members in furthering their skill sets. However, I don't believe in gatekeeping any of this stuff. And so everything I do is open enrollment. As long as you are a U.S. citizen and able to own a firearm, you can sign up for a class. And the only thing I require for the majority of my classes is that you understand how to safely handle and operate the firearms that you are bringing to class. So if, you know, you go out and you buy a Kalashnikov and you've never played with a Kalashnikov before, I would prefer that you don't show up to class and be trying to learn how to operate it in the class, because it's going to take away from your ability to understand some of the concepts that are being taught.
Sure. It's better
But I can work with that. You know,
Sure.
it's the folks who might show up and not fully understand the importance of muzzle awareness. You know, the people who think, oh, well, I didn't have my finger on the trigger, so it's okay, or I know it's unloaded, so, you know, don't freak out because I pointed it at you. As long as people understand those concepts and can apply them, that's the only level of skill that they need to show up. But at the same time, the class is structured in such a way that even if you are an experienced shooter and you have a lot of time behind your gun and you might consider yourself a professional, the class can still benefit you. Because the way that it flows and the way that it's set up is that anybody from the absolute novice to a professional can show up and train and learn at their pace. The only thing that'll change is that professional will be able to apply the concepts a little bit easier, and they'll be shooting faster than the novice, who is going to be shooting probably a little bit slower, maybe not as accurately, but is still going to be focusing on those same concepts. And then with that novice shooter, I might work with them more just on how they stand and how they hold their gun. And then an experienced shooter, I'm going to be pushing them to use lower levels of sight confirmation to shoot faster and working those small little things to increase their efficiency and just get faster and more accurate and more deadly. So this is the second year in operation for Maneuver Training Solutions, and making a bit of a shift this year from last year. Last year everything was single day classes, trying to offer a large volume so that the opportunities were available and help work within people's schedules. What I found though is that despite that, it was still not as viable for a lot of people to travel for a single day class. And even though I do get a good amount of clientele from the local area, there are a lot of people who travel from Florida, New Jersey, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, Virginia, South Carolina, areas I did not expect people to travel here from. So I've now switched over to 2-day classes. Everything is a 2-day classes, and I've been combining programs to support those 2 days. So if you take a pistol skill clinic class, you're going to get 2 days of training. The first day is going to focus hard on honing your fundamentals. And then the second day, we will work some dry practice, and I will guide you through how to structure your own dry practice training, and we'll look at the importance of it. And that also serves as an opportunity for the students to apply some of the concepts and techniques we worked on the day prior, but now because they're not shooting, no one's concerned about that result on the target. You know, they'll see their sights, they'll feel their trigger pull, and so when we actually get to shooting on that second day, they're a little bit better. And then that second day will involve getting into movement. So we'll do a quick rehash of the first day through dry practice and a little bit of live fire, and then we'll start working on how to incorporate movement with your shooting through both position, exit, and entry, and shooting while moving. And then that will also finish up with just a introduction to mid-range, shooting out to 200 yards. Nothing new and nothing challenging for any of the Marines that come through the class, but definitely a lot of the civilians, law enforcement, and some of the folks I've had from other services, it's much less common for them to do it, to the point I've had people who didn't even realize that an AR could shoot out to 200 yards. But then when they see how easy it is from a standing position, totally unsupported, to shoot, you know, a small torso-sized piece of steel at 200 yards, you know, just applying the fundamentals that we used the day prior. So that is the basis of the classes that I teach, is either a pistol skill clinic or a rifle skill clinic, working on those fundamentals. From there, I do have some other course offerings. Like my next course is going to be a night vision class. You know, seeing a lot more and more folks getting into night vision, especially people outside the military. So I wanted to offer that as an opportunity for them to come out and use their equipment, learn how to use their equipment to its fullest ability, and then get comfortable, you know, walking around on night vision. So I offer the night vision class, and I also offer a couple of personal and home defense based classes. One is, it's the same program, but I either offer it focused on the pistol or focused on the rifle. And that kind of is the culmination of everything that I offer. And then as the demand for certain things increases, then, you know, I'll be scheduling more things. For right now, I have classes scheduled up from now, this last weekend of February, through June. And it's about one class a month, because I also work with Orion Training Group, and that work has been picking up a lot.
So do you commute down to what's it called, Louisiana a lot?
So whenever I work with Orion Training Group, I don't go down to Louisiana. I am essentially the East Coast guy for the moment. We just announced another member of the cadre who's also here in North Carolina. So he and I will start picking up more of the Orion Training Group classes here on the East Coast, but I've done training here in North Carolina, I've done South Carolina, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania keeps calling me back. I've done a handful of classes up in Pennsylvania as well. Cool. Our mock briefs, and the Chief Scout walked up to the right board and just wrote in big letters, "Stop the fucking." And we're like, what? And he was like, "You guys just keep dropping F-bombs." Yeah. Like every sentence has multiple F-bombs, and he's like, "You can't brief that way." And he's like, "Every time I hear it again, you guys are going to owe 25 and 5. And we're like, okay.
Oh, that's going to add up really quickly.
Yeah, so it was like really, now I got to be really focused on my words, and that built into, and I had good leadership after that when I made it. Making it going Force Recon was the best things for me ever. Yeah.
Closing thoughts. What is there anything to someone like myself, or not to just me, to whoever's watching this, whether it be kind of like I'm assuming you probably watched Grantham before, right? Dad advice kind of thing, right? If you could give dad advice to the community, what would it be?
Well, I will give the same advice that I gave to my son long ago, and I continue to give to him, is the world does not need more weak people. We got plenty of those. The world needs people of strength, and that's not just physical strength. It's not just go to the gym, which is important, but it's strength of character, of morals. Be courageous, be kind, and be a dangerous person. Because if you can understand what that violence means and the implications of what will happen afterwards, you will understand that it's not your first answer, and that your first answer is to be kind, to be smarter, and what the right thing truly is.
Sure.
It's the people who do not understand violence that are dangerous people, because they don't understand it and they use it far too willingly, and then are bewildered by the consequences that follow.